Hello, family members. I hope you're having a nice day today. I'd like to talk to you today about something that is a little reviled in our society, and that is sequels, reboots, remakes, retellings, reimaginings, spin-offs, all of those things. Something where there's an original piece of content and then other people iterate on that same content, on that same story. And a lot of people look down at that kind of art as, derivative and frivolous and unnecessary, unwanted, low quality trash. And I think that maybe we need to rethink that a bit, because I think that the way that we look at stories is sort of warped and wrong, and I wanna explain why I think that. So here we go. So all this started because of FD Signifier. It's all his fault. If you don't know who that is, he's a YouTuber and he's great and you should watch him. He was talking about rap music, and he said that if an art form is not engaged with by the youth of a culture, it's essentially dead. And that really struck me, really sat with me, and I kept thinking about that and how that applies to art outside of music. There's a whole lot of people out there who are, retelling stories in new and interesting ways. I mean, look at fan fiction, But things like that can't really exist on a broader scale because of copyright. And I think that copyright has warped our view of storytelling. It's made us forget that a key element in storytelling is telling stories over and over again and reiterating on the same stories. I mean, look at Shakespeare. Look at all of the plays that he wrote that were based on earlier plays, like, say, Romeo and Juliet. And then look at all the iterations of that play that have happened since then. West Side Story being a prominent example. They were able to take that same story that Shakespeare was able to take and reimagine for his time and reimagine it for our time, or, like 50s or whatever, last century. Oh my gosh, I'm old. Anyway, when I think about, say, Star Wars, would Star Wars still have the cultural relevance that it does if it weren't for the prequels? If it weren't for the extended universe books? I heard a lot of people be very dismissive about both of those things, and I'm telling you, there are some really good extended universe books from before the time the prequels were put out, and I think it's great that that exists, and I want to see more things like that exist. I think it's nice when you don't have to necessarily do all the world building, that you can just get into a story and tell a different aspect of a story using similar characters at a similar place, maybe, but we don't get to do that because copyright blocks us. I think about Jane Austen. I know that the first time I tried to read Jane Austen, it just didn't take. I just didn't get the voice. I didn't understand how to get into the right mindset to appreciate that novel, which is a shame because I had a friend that was like a huge Austenite at the time, and I was like, sorry, I can't relate. But then later, after I knew the story of Pride and Prejudice, I tried to read it again. After I'd seen the movie, I believe, the Keira Knightley movie, or one of them, I don't remember exactly, but I know that I knew the story the next time. I knew some of the voice the next time I tried to read it. And suddenly I was able to understand it and I was able to enjoy it. And I was able to read other books by Jane Austen. Like Sense and Sensibility is absolutely my favorite. Like I love it, you know? And I was, inclined to read Emma, for example, because I'd seen both the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma, which is like more of a straight version and adaptation, but also Clueless, which is that modern reinterpretation, you know? Those pieces of art are something that the young people know because there's been newer versions, newer iterations, and things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, you know, which introduces those characters in that story to a completely different audience. Like, I've read the book and of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and it's pretty entertaining, you know, as someone who is a little bit of an Austenite, you know, but I know that it's got to be pretty entertaining for people who aren't too. And it brings more people in. It intrigues people. It shows that this is something that might be worth your time. You know, when I think about like actresses from the earlier like classic Hollywood era, or you know, before like my parents were adult kind of times, like the ones that I know are the ones that are part of stories that got retold. Fay Wray, you know, we know about King Kong because they keep remaking King Kong. And then there's things that are a little less direct, like the song Betty Davis Eyes. That's probably how I heard about Betty Davis first, was a song somebody wrote about how she looked, you know. And that's not the only time that, you know, somebody, a famous person from times past, or a historical person from times past, is given new appreciation to new generations because of references and stories that include characters they played, you know. It's interesting to me to think about stuff like that because I look at, like, say, My Little Pony. When I grew up, I loved My Little Pony. I was really into My Little Pony. It was like my thing. And I loved the cartoons, and I couldn't get them on, because we didn't have cable, and I lived out in the middle of nowhere, and we got like 2.5 channels on a good day, okay? So my granddaddy would literally record cartoons on his cable down here, or maybe he didn't even need cable because he was in the city. But he would send us cartoons, and sometimes it was My Little Pony. And I never got to see the whole, like, arc, the whole story arc, because I was just getting these bits and pieces. But I loved it. I loved it. And I was really, like, annoyed when they rebooted My Little Pony the first time, because I didn't think they were that cute. But the fact of the matter is, if they hadn't rebooted that first time, they probably wouldn't have rebooted it again. That probably wouldn't have been the franchise probably would have died out. You don't see, like, Rainbow Bright remakes, okay? But you do see My Little Pony remakes. And there are people that absolutely love the new iteration of that. And I think that's great. But I also think it's great that it brings people into a familiarity with something that I adored as a child, too. You know, art and commerce are such a weird thing. There's such a tension there, a push and pull. Great things can be made in the name of commerce. You know, there's that Michael Eisner quote about, you know, we're not in the business to make art, but we're in the business to make money. And in order to do that, sometimes you make art, you know. Well, yeah, that's part of the push and pull. And I do think that art unfettered isn't necessarily better. I think it's good when there's that push and pull of influences. You know, art that is made under duress can be extremely creative, right? And innovative. And the fact that we have let copyright warp our brains into thinking that a character, that stories can be owned and shouldn't be just part of the culture, available to anyone to reiterate and reimagine and be inspired by. Like, I think it's kind of gross because we all know that if some small independent creator creates a story or a character and a corporation wants it, they'll take it. If they can find some way to take it and think they'll get away with it, they will. But if I were to try to make some sort of commercial art using Disney characters, I bet they'd have a problem with that, right? That's the thing. That's the thing is like copyright only exists to stifle smaller creators from being able to reiterate on music and art and fashion and stories and all of the things that are normal and natural for humans to share. You know, we do that. We are the people who look at one person's idea and try to think about new ways of looking at it. That's one of the best things about humans. There's so many of us, and we all have different perspectives, and that gives us the opportunity to think about new things and do new things and be new things and tell old stories in new ways. I think about, like, Marilyn Monroe. You know, she has become like an archetype, like a character. And people retell her story all the time, whether they're direct about it or not. I mean, her husband, Arthur Miller, did that a lot. A lot of his plays were about her, even if he didn't admit it. One inspiring person or character, because really, when we're talking about Marilyn Monroe, we're talking about a public image that was created in part by Norma Jean and in part by the machine that built her up and tore her down. But that archetype, that character, that is so inspiring. It resonates so deeply. And it would be a shame if people couldn't tell those stories that are inspired by her. You know, they can change enough that it's not going to cause any sort of copyright issues. But the thing is, I would love to see more fan fiction be made into other mediums, because fan fiction, some of it is just so good. I know you've probably heard about 50 Shades of Grey's, Twilight fan fiction, blah, blah, blah. Most fan fiction is not ever going to get published. And most fan fiction is not just like, well, a lot of fan fiction is just smut, like 50 Shades of Grey. But that's okay. People need their smut too. But, I mean, I've read some really amazing, detailed, wonderful stories. And they are never really going to be appreciated in the way that they should because of copyright. Because they can't just publish it and make it available to the public. They have to have it on a website and people have to go looking. You know, it's not going to be the same thing at all. You know, you're not going to go to the library and see a copy of it on the shelf. Although that's not really as common these days anyway, I guess. But I want to see the important stories that I loved growing up get new life. T2 is such a good movie. Terminator 2. I mean, T1 is all right. I mean, the problem with T1 is it was just made a little too early. The technology really wasn't quite there. It's a great story. It's a solid movie. But the special effects just don't hold up very well. So unless you go into it expecting that, it might be a little weird to watch it. But T2 is not like that. T2 is a masterpiece. The special effects in T2 are jaw-droppingly good. Even today, I'd say. Like, I can't even tell you how much I love that movie. And I was obsessed with the character of John Connor. And I loved seeing different iterations of that character. I watched T3 and I liked it pretty much. T4, it was pretty good. And then, they kept making more media, and maybe it's not for me, but allows younger generations to know those characters and those concepts, and then, go back and appreciate the, amazingness that is T2 at some point, right? Like, I want to see things stay alive. I want to see media stay alive. I mean, not all media is great. Let's be honest. There's things like, say, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is such an annoyingly good movie on so many levels. Like, technically, and Vivian Lee's acting. Oh my gosh. I mean, Olivia de Havilland is really good too, I will say. And of course, Mammy got her Oscar, right? So there's a lot of things in that movie that are really interesting and cool. And then there's a lot of things in that movie that are deeply problematic and upsetting, It whitewashes a really dark part of our history in a lot of ways. I mean, there are hints here and there. You can see that there was some awareness of the problematic nature, but that tension between art and commerce, if it was going to play in the South at all. So they had to kind of blunt any sort of mentions of the true horrors of slavery, I don't know how that could be reimagined in a way that would be respectful. But I think that piece of art still stays alive because the character of Scarlett O'Hara is so powerful. And she gets referenced and parodied so often. You don't see that many female anti-heroines. That aren't that many iconic epic tales with a female protagonist, especially not ones that have been made into big budget movies like that. And the younger generations may completely reject it. And then that art might be lost to time. Who knows? And I think that would be a shame. I think about Some Like It Hot. Some Like It Hot was itself a remake of a foreign film and was a huge smash hit for Marilyn Monroe and Billy Wilder and Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon. And it really boosted all of their careers. But it might be forgotten today if it weren't for the fact that it's been reimagined as a Broadway musical. And because it's been reimagined, they're able to add in story elements that wouldn't have been able to be presented the way they are because of that tension between art and commerce, because society has changed. And we're able to talk about people being queer, non-binary, trans, whatever. And I think that's awesome, you know? I look at, like, Mean Girls and Heathers and Hairspray. I think it's great that all those stories get to be told and retold, you know? Hairspray is one of my favorite musicals, honestly. I'm really obsessed with it. It's kind of sad. But, like, give me back my Ariana Grande version. She is so good as Penny, it's not fair. Anyway, yeah. And Tough Kid. Sorry, I'm off track. I could talk about Hairspray. And John Waters. You know, that's the thing. John Waters, his art has this edge to it. And it's not going to be for everyone. And I think it's kind of awesome that somebody reiterated on that great story that he made, centered on a plus-size teenage girl and her plus-size mother. How fucking often do we get that in any media? And I think it's also awesome because Hairspray has this habit of casting an unknown for Tracy every time it's reiterated. And so that creates new plus-size celebrities that get a little bit of name recognition. And that is so hard to have happen. It's really annoying, you know. I love the fact that that exists. And, you know, some kid is going to watch Hairspray or see Hairspray produced or do Hairspray at their high school and play Tracy Turnblad themselves. And they're going to be interested enough to go back and watch Hairspray and maybe more of John Waters' catalog and be exposed to more wonderful art, you know? I think that we need to stop being like, why are they making all these comic book movies? Why are they reinventing these characters? Why are they doing this, all the reboots and blah, blah? Have you ever read comic books? Comic books have lots of reboots and reimaginings and this version and that version. I mean, how many Captain Americas have there been? How many Green Lanterns have there been? You know, how many guys have been Robin? You know, like, very rarely do you have a superhero that doesn't get reiterated. You know, Superman has Supergirl, you know, like, it just, you see this often, over and over again. You see characters written in different ways, given different contexts. That is a normal thing in comic books. And once they started making comic book movies that were actually good, because there were a lot of really bad comic book movies when I was growing up as a comic book nerd. And I was really excited to see some of my favorite stories reiterated, and they were not done well. Like, honestly, I will admit, I love the Fantastic Four with Chris Evans and Jessica Alba. That movie is so campy and hilarious and good on a so bad it's good level. But it's not a good movie, you know? I guess it did well enough to get a sequel, so there's that. Now, a lot of comic book movies didn't, but, you know, like, I think it's hilarious. I really think it's so funny when people are like, oh, you can't reiterate that. You can't. The sequels and reboots and spin-offs and all of that, that is comic books. They've just taken comic books and moved them just from being in a comic book format to making them be in a movie and TV show format. It's just the same thing. It's always going to be this weird cloud of different sort of intersecting characters and stories and places. That's comic books, you know? I mean, that's that kind of comic books, superhero type comic books, you know? Sorry. I get a little worked up about that. No. I think about characters like Emma Frost. Emma Frost, to me, is the mentor of Generation X. I love Generation X. It was like one of my favorite comic books. I was so obsessed. I still have a poster on my wall. That book has been canceled and completely forgotten about by almost everybody but me, I believe. But people still remember Emma Frost because she was in other content after that. And people who were introduced to her before me probably think of her as the Hellfire Club White Queen, you know? She is a character who gets remade, and that's just part of who she is. I mean, it's so funny to me, like, in some of the movies, they gave her, like, ice powers, which is, like, hilarious just because her last name is Frost. That was really funny to me. But, a lot of characters that I liked from that book did get to go on and be in other media. Obviously, Jubilee was sort of like the celebrity character to try to bring everybody into the book. And so she was famous before, during, and after. But, I think like Chamber went on to be a character that gets used. And, um, you know, I think that's great. It's great to know that out there somewhere, those characters are still getting to be part of stories and being introduced to younger audiences. And people get to know that story so they can be inspired by it and maybe create their own story, you know? I don't know, I love seeing different people's perspectives on things. I think one of the best things that ever happened to nerd culture was the weird implicit decision that fan fiction didn't count as copyright stuff. And very few creators and authors really cared very much if people were making fan fiction. And that allowed these subcultures to grow, and it allowed people to become writers. There are a lot of published writers that started out writing fan fiction, and that's awesome. They got a chance to write, get feedback, get better, and maybe they wouldn't have ever even tried writing. Maybe they wouldn't have thought that they could do it if it weren't for the fact that their friends were writing fan fiction. Oh, I can do that too, you know? I think that it'd be great if young filmmakers had that same leeway. Young musicians had that same leeway to be able to use and reuse and reimagine and remake any art that inspires them, instead of having to dodge in between this arbitrary copyright law that really only is used against small independent creators and voices. I would love it if people had the ability to just make whatever it is they want to make. Because corporations will figure out a way to get what they want one way or the other. We need to take art back. We need to decorporatize art. Corporations can still be part of making the process of making art. They can be the producers or whatever, but the actual art isn't theirs. They can't own that. They can't own stories. They can't own music. They can't own songs. They can't own other people's voices. They should not be able to do what they do, but they do. And they have ingrained this idea in us so deeply that we don't see how unnatural it is. And that is why we get mad at sequels and remakes and reboots. And we're like, where are all the original stories? Without thinking that there are no original stories. everything is influenced by the art that came before it. The archetypes, like shorthand. There's nothing that a human makes that is completely original, and that's good. We are a collaborative species. We are meant to work together. We are meant to have a bunch of different personalities and point of views coming at something from all different angles so that we can figure out how to do things better or in new ways. It's just really important that humans are allowed to collaborate. And we have vilified collaboration because it's beneficial to corporations who want to keep copyright because they can use that against other people so they can get paid for other people's art for decades after they're even dead. I mean, it is so weird to me that a character as old as Mickey Mouse is not public domain. It should be, you know? We got Steamboat Willie, but that's not, you still are going to have to go through a bunch of hoops if you want to use Steamboat Willie. I'm sure if you tried to use Steamboat Willie in a commercial sense, they would be kind of on your booty to make sure that you weren't going outside of the lines of what you're allowed, right? I think we need to flip our perception, and that's it. That's the long and the short of it, is that we need to see new entries into established canon as a natural and normal thing, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good, and we need to judge it based on its merits, but also understand that even if we don't like it, it's not always for us. All right, family members, I think I've rambled about this long enough. I will let you go. I hope you have a wonderful day and that your air conditioner isn't broken like mine is. I also had to remake this video like 7 times because things kept going wrong. So, yay, we got here.